"Sign it, or I'll hit you harder," my own son threatened, holding the bank document with trembling hands. When I said no, his fist landed squarely on my nose. The crack of the bone echoed through the house. Blood ran down my white shirt, and in that moment, I knew the son I had raised with so much love was gone. Before we continue, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories. Turn on notifications because we have new stories every day. Leave a like, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. My name is William Miller. I'm 68 years old, and my whole life I thought I knew my family. I worked for 45 years as a supervisor in a textile factory on the outskirts of Chicago, saving every dollar I could to ensure a decent future for my children. My wife Linda died 3 years ago from cancer, and since then my son Daniel became my only real connection to the world. It was Tuesday, the 22nd of January 2024, when everything changed forever. I had just finished my morning coffee and was reading the newspaper in my favorite armchair, the brown leather one Linda gave me for our 20th anniversary. The doorbell rang insistently, as if someone was in a hurry. When I opened the door, I found Daniel with a distraught face, sweating despite the winter cold that gripped Chicago that week. "Dad, I need you to sign this right now," he said, without a greeting, holding out a manila envelope that trembled in his hands. His eyes were red, with dark circles as if he hadn't slept in days. He was wearing the same clothes he had on last week when he came for lunch, wrinkled pants and a jacket that smelled strange, like chemicals. "Good morning, son. What's so urgent you can't even say hello to your father?" I replied, inviting him in. Daniel stormed in, slamming the door harder than necessary. The sound echoed through the quiet house, waking my cat Tiger, who ran out to the backyard. "There's no time for talk, Dad. Just sign here," he insisted, pulling bank documents from the envelope. As I quickly looked them over, my heart stopped. It was an authorization to transfer my entire savings account, $120,000 I had accumulated over decades, directly into his name. The deadline for the transaction was that same day, before 5 in the afternoon. "Daniel, this is all my money, everything I have to live on in my final years," I explained, my voice trembling as the sting of betrayal began to settle in my chest. "What's going on? Why do you need so much money so desperately?" His reaction was completely unexpected. Instead of explaining, he started pacing my living room, running his hands through his messy hair. "You don't need to understand anything, just sign. I'm your son, trust me. I'll pay you back in a few months, I swear on Mom's memory." "Precisely because you're my son, I can't sign this without an explanation," I replied firmly, placing the documents on the coffee table. "If you need money, we can talk. But I'm not handing over my life savings without knowing what it's for." It was then I saw a side of Daniel I had never witnessed before. His face twisted in anger, his fists clenched, and he started yelling like a stranger. "You stubborn old man! Just sign it! I don't need to explain anything to you." "Daniel, calm down. Sit down, and let's talk like civilized people." I tried to calm him, but my words only seemed to enrage him more. He walked towards me aggressively, took the documents, and shoved them in my face. "Sign it, or I'll hit you harder," he threatened in a voice I didn't recognize. The loving son I had raised was gone, replaced by a violent stranger holding papers with shaking hands. When I told him no, that I needed time to think and understand the situation, his right fist came straight for my nose. The pain was instant and unbearable. I heard the crack of the breaking bone, felt the warm blood running down my face, staining my favorite white shirt. I fell back onto my armchair, dizzy and confused, while Daniel screamed words my mind refused to fully process. The room started to spin, tears mixed with blood, and for the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own son. Daniel took the documents, put them back in the envelope, and stormed out of my house, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. I was left there, bleeding and shaking, wondering what I had done so wrong to deserve such a betrayal from the person I loved most in this world. I woke up in a bed at St. Joseph's Hospital, with bandages covering my face and a throbbing pain that constantly reminded me of what had happened. The nurses told me a neighbor, Mr. Peterson, had found me unconscious in my living room 3 hours after the incident. The nasal fracture was severe, but my deepest pain wasn't physical. Dr. Thomas Peterson, an older man with a gray beard, was checking my vitals when my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I decided to answer, thinking it might be a relative worried about me. "Mr. William Miller?" a serious female voice asked on the other end. "This is Patricia Evans from Bank of America Security Department. We need to speak with you urgently about suspicious activity on your account." My heart started beating faster. "Tell me, miss, What kind of activity? Someone tried to make a full transfer from your savings account at 3 in the morning using documents with irregularities. Our automated system blocked the transaction, but the person insisted for 2 hours. They provided correct personal data, but the signature didn't quite match our records. The room started to spin again. Daniel had not only hit me, but he had also tried to rob me while I was unconscious in the hospital. Can you tell me if it was a young man, about 42 years old? I can't provide that information over the phone, Mr. Miller. We need you to come to the bank in person to review the security footage and file a formal complaint. When could you come in? I'm in the hospital, but I'll be there tomorrow without fail, I replied, feeling the betrayal deepen. Patricia explained they had preserved all the evidence, recordings, forged documents, and access attempt logs. The transaction would have completely emptied my account, leaving me without a single dollar to survive. That night was the longest of my life. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's distorted face threatening me. I wondered how long he had been planning this. If Linda's death had been his perfect opportunity to manipulate me, if all his affectionate gestures in recent months had been a complete act. The night nurse, an older woman named Linda Johnson, noticed I couldn't sleep and sat by my bed. Mr. Miller, I've worked here for 30 years. I've seen many cases of family violence, and it's always harder when it comes from someone close. I don't understand how we got to this point, I confessed. Daniel was a sweet, studious boy. He works at an advertising agency. He's married to Sarah. They have a nice house. What could have changed so much? Linda shook her head sadly. Sometimes adult children develop problems that parents don't see until it's too late. Drugs, gambling, debt, desperation makes people act in unthinkable ways. Her words stuck with me. Over the next few days in the hospital, I started remembering strange details from the past few months. Daniel's frequent but brief visits, always asking for small amounts of money for emergencies. His worn-out appearance, the constant dark circles, the nervous way he constantly checked his phone. On Wednesday morning, after being discharged, I went straight to the bank. Patricia Evans was a professional woman in her 50s who met me in a private office. The security footage clearly showed Daniel at the ATM, then at the teller window, arguing aggressively with the night staff. Your son, and I assume it's your son from the resemblance, presented an authorization with your signature, but our experts detected it was forged, Patricia explained as we reviewed the documents. He also tried to answer security questions, but failed on specific details that only you should know. What kind of questions? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Your mother's maiden name, the exact date of your first job, your life insurance policy number. Very personal information a son might know, but he gave incorrect answers for all three. This confirmed the operation had been planned hastily, likely driven by immediate desperation. Patricia showed me the official forms to file a complaint for attempted bank fraud and document forgery. Mr. Miller, you should know these crimes can have serious criminal consequences. I left the bank with copies of all the evidence, and a feeling of complete unreality. My own son had tried to ruin me financially while I was fighting to survive in a hospital. During the taxi ride home, I looked at the streets of Chicago with different eyes, as if everything had lost its color after discovering the true nature of the person I trusted most. When I got home, I found the front door slightly ajar. My heart raced, thinking Daniel had returned, but as I checked each room, I discovered something equally disturbing. Several valuable items were missing. My father's gold watch, the jewelry Linda kept in her box, a collection of old coins I had saved since my youth. The betrayal was deeper than I imagined. He hadn't just tried to empty my bank account. He had been stealing from my own home, probably for weeks or months. I sat in my armchair, the same one where he had hit me, and understood that I needed to act with intelligence and determination to protect what was left of my assets and my dignity. Over the next few days, I decided to become a detective in my own home. I took a pen and paper to meticulously inventory every valuable item I remembered owning. The list was devastating. 17 important pieces were missing, from my grandmother Hope's silver dinnerware to an ivory crucifix that had belonged to 4 generations of my family. What struck me most was finding that the chest where Linda kept her rings was practically empty. Only her wedding band remained. The one piece of jewelry Daniel knew had irreplaceable sentimental value to me. Everything else had been taken with surgical precision, as if someone had studied every detail of the house for months. On Friday afternoon, while checking drawers and closets, I found something that made my blood run cold. On Linda's desk, where she used to pay the bills, there were strange marks on the wood, Someone had forced open the secret drawer where we kept important documents and some emergency cash. The mechanism was broken, clearly tampered with by someone who knew it existed. That night, I decided to call Sarah, Daniel's wife. I needed answers, and maybe she could explain what was happening with her husband. Her phone rang several times before she answered with a nervous, shaky voice. "Hello, William. How's your nose? Daniel told me you had an accident." She lied shamelessly, but her tone betrayed that she knew the truth. "Sarah, we need to talk urgently. Can you come to my house tomorrow? It's about Daniel and some very serious things that are happening." There was a long silence before she replied. "William, we're going through a very difficult time. Daniel has serious problems, but he forbade me from talking to you about it." "What kind of problems, Sarah?" "I'm his father. I have a right to know what's destroying my family." I heard sobbing on the other end of the line. "I can't talk on the phone. I'll come tomorrow afternoon, but you have to promise me you'll keep our conversation secret. If Daniel finds out I talked to you, the consequences will be terrible for everyone." Saturday arrived, heavy with tension. Sarah appeared at my door at 4 in the afternoon, visibly upset. She had lost a lot of weight since I last saw her. Her eyes were swollen from constant crying, and she wore sunglasses even though the day was cloudy. When she took them off to come inside, I could see a yellowish bruise around her left eye. "Sarah, is he hitting you too?" I asked directly, feeling anger begin to boil inside me. "It's not really him, William. It's what he's using. Daniel started using drugs about 8 months ago after he was passed over for a big promotion at work. At first it was just marijuana on weekends, but then he discovered harder things." She sat on my sofa and began to tell me a story that completely transformed my understanding of the situation. Daniel had developed a severe cocaine addiction, initially spending his own savings, then selling personal items, and finally resorting to systematically stealing from my house to fund his daily habit. The dealers in a rough neighborhood on the south side gave him credit because they knew about his job and his family. Now he owes $50,000, William. $50,000 that we don't have, and they're threatening to hurt us if he doesn't pay by next Friday. The figure was exactly half of my savings. Daniel had calculated that he needed all my money to pay off his debts and have some left over to keep using. "Why didn't you tell me anything sooner? We could have sought help, treatment, something other than violence." He's convinced he can control it on his own. Every time I mention rehab or asking for family help, he gets aggressive. Last week he threatened to hit the kids if I kept insisting we get outside support. The kids. I had completely forgotten about my grandchildren in the midst of this nightmare. Leo, 8, and Sophie, 5. 2 innocent children witnessing their father's self-destruction and living in a constant state of domestic violence. "Where are Leo and Sophie now?" I asked, worried for their safety. "With my parents in Wisconsin. I took them there a week ago when Daniel started acting completely erratic. He's losing weight rapidly. He doesn't sleep for days and then crashes for hours. His behavior is becoming more unpredictable and dangerous." Sarah explained that she had tried to hide money and valuables, but Daniel knew every possible hiding place in their own house. That's why he had started coming to mine. Initially, just to take small things he thought I wouldn't notice right away, but after realizing the size of his debt, he decided he needed full access to my bank account. "William, I'm terrified. Last night he came home screaming that you had ruined everything, that because of you the dealers were going to kill us. He's blaming you for not signing the papers, as if it were your obligation to finance his addiction." I got up and walked to the window, looking at the garden Linda and I had tended to for so many years. The irony was bitter. I had worked my whole life to build a legacy that would provide security for my family, and now that very legacy had become the target of my family's destruction. "Sarah, we're going to solve this together, but I need you to understand something very important. I'm not going to hand over my money to fund drugs, but I'm also not going to let them hurt my family. We have to be very smart about how we handle this." When Sarah left that afternoon, I was left to reflect on the available options. I could go to the police immediately, but that would mean Daniel would end up in prison, and his creditors would seek revenge against Sarah and the children. I could also pay his debts, but that would only postpone the problem and validate his violent behavior towards me. That night, as I organized all the information I had gathered, I realized I needed to develop a more sophisticated strategy, one that would protect my family, punish Daniel for his betrayal, and permanently eliminate the threat from the drug dealers. The solution would require patience, intelligence, and the help of professionals who could guide me through both the legal aspects and the immediate dangers we all faced. On Sunday morning, I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt in years. After thinking all night, I decided it was time to implement a meticulous plan that would require a lot of patience and cunning. The first step was to get concrete evidence of Daniel's activities inside my own home. I went to an electronics store at the Westfield Mall, where a young employee named Michael Harris helped me select small, discrete security cameras. "Sir, these cameras are motion-activated and record directly to a memory card. They are practically invisible once installed correctly." I bought 4 tiny devices that I could hide in strategic spots: the main living room, my bedroom, the office where I kept important documents, and the kitchen where I had a small safe behind the microwave. The investment was $300, but I considered it a minimal sum compared to what was at stake. During the installation, which took me all of Sunday afternoon, I began to notice details I had previously overlooked. On the doorframe of my bedroom there were tool marks, a sign that someone had tried to force the lock several times. The dust on certain shelves showed strange patterns, as if objects had been moved and replaced repeatedly. I also discovered something disturbing in the guest bathroom: white residue in the sink and small, crumpled plastic bags behind the toilet. My knowledge of drugs was limited, but these signs suggested that Daniel had been using substances right here in my house, probably during his family visits over the past few months. Early on Monday, I decided to contact a lawyer specializing in criminal and family law. Through the yellow pages, I found the firm of Nicholas Reed, a professional with 30 years of experience who had offices near the courthouse. His secretary, a very efficient older woman, scheduled an appointment for me that same afternoon. Nicholas turned out to be a serious man of about 55, with a perfectly trimmed gray beard and a penetrating gaze that inspired immediate confidence. His office was filled with law books and professional certificates that validated his expertise in complex cases like mine. "Mr. Miller, after hearing your full story, I can confirm that you are facing multiple simultaneous crimes," he explained, taking detailed notes. "We have physical assault, attempted bank fraud, document forgery, domestic theft, and possibly drug trafficking, if we can prove he is selling the stolen items to acquire illicit substances." Nicholas explained that the video evidence would be crucial to building a solid case, but he also warned me about the family implications of proceeding legally against my own son. "You must understand that once we file the corresponding complaints, the judicial process will run its course, regardless of your paternal feelings." "My paternal feelings died when he hit me for money," I replied with complete sincerity. "Now I just want to protect what's left of my assets and ensure that Sarah and my grandchildren are safe." The lawyer gave me a list of documents I needed to gather: bank records, photographs of the stolen items, medical reports of my nasal injury, and any written or recorded communication I had with Daniel. He also recommended that I contact the police to report the domestic thefts, thus establishing an official record of the crimes. That afternoon, I visited the 18th Precinct Station, where a detective named Maria Sanchez met me in a small but organized office. She was a middle-aged woman with a professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She had handled hundreds of similar cases and understood perfectly the emotional complexity of reporting a direct family member. "Mr. Miller, I need you to understand that once we formalize this complaint, we will open an investigation that could result in criminal charges against your son," she explained as she filled out the corresponding forms. "Are you absolutely sure you want to proceed?" "Detective, my son broke my nose, tried to steal my life savings, and has been taking valuable items from my house for months. If that doesn't deserve legal consequences, then I don't understand what justice is for." Maria officially recorded my complaint for domestic theft, physical assault, and attempted fraud. She gave me a case number and explained that they would assign a detective to investigate aspects related to possible drug trafficking. "If your son is selling stolen items to buy illegal substances, we will be talking about federal crimes with much harsher sentences." When I returned home that night, I reviewed the security footage for the first time. What I saw confirmed my worst suspicions. Daniel had been entering my house regularly using a copy of my key, probably made months ago without my knowledge. The recordings showed him systematically searching each room, selecting specific items, and using drugs right in my living room. In one particularly disturbing recording from the previous Friday, Daniel was seen injecting something into his arm using my dining table as a surface. After using the substance, he proceeded to rummage through drawers and closets with frantic movements, as if looking for something specific. At the end of that session, he took a silver candlestick that had belonged to my parents. The evidence was overwhelming and unquestionable. My son was not only a thief and an aggressor, but also a drug addict who had turned my home into his criminal operations center. Each recording showed a pattern of more erratic and desperate behavior, confirming that his addiction was rapidly worsening. That night, as I was organizing all the collected documentation, I received a phone call that would completely change my strategy. It was Sarah, crying hysterically and almost incoherent with panic. "William, I need your help urgently. Daniel disappeared 2 days ago, and I just found a threatening note in my mailbox. They say if he doesn't pay what he owes by Wednesday, they're going to hurt the children. I'm desperate, and I don't know what to do." The situation had escalated more quickly than anticipated. The dealers were losing patience, and now my innocent grandchildren were directly threatened. It was time to accelerate my plan and take more drastic measures to protect my family, while appropriately punishing the one who had put us in this dangerous situation. Sarah's desperate call forced me to act with more urgency than planned. I told her to come to my house immediately, but to take precautions to ensure no one followed her. While waiting for her, I reviewed the latest recordings from my security cameras and discovered something that made my blood run cold. In the video from the previous Tuesday, Daniel hadn't come alone. A young man with visible tattoos on his neck was with him, carefully observing every corner of my house while my son pointed out the locations of valuable items. He was literally guiding a professional criminal through my home, cataloging everything that could be stolen or sold later. The recording showed this stranger taking pictures with his cell phone of my most expensive belongings. The big screen TV, the sound system, even appliances like the washer and refrigerator. My house had been completely assessed, as if it were a warehouse of goods for illegal trafficking. When Sarah arrived around 11 at night, she brought the threatening note she had found in her mailbox. It was written on plain paper in irregular block letters. "Your husband owes us $50,000. If he doesn't pay by Wednesday, we'll visit your kids in Wisconsin. We know where your parents live. William, these criminals have investigated our entire family." Sarah sobbed as her hands trembled. "They know my parents' address, Leo and Sophie's school schedules. They even know I work at Mercy Hospital on Tuesdays and Thursdays." I showed her the security footage of the unknown man. Sarah immediately turned pale and began to shake uncontrollably. "That's Ricky Vargas, one of the main cocaine distributors on the South Side. Daniel introduced him to me 3 months ago as his business partner, but I later found out he was his drug supplier and loan shark. The situation was much more complex and dangerous than I had initially imagined. We weren't just talking about an addicted son stealing to fund his habit, but an organized criminal network that had identified my family as a strategic target. My savings of $120,000 wouldn't just pay off Daniel's debts. We would become a permanent source of income for these criminals. Sarah, I need you to tell me everything you know about the operations of these criminals. Where are they based? How do they run their business? Who are their partners? We're going to end this for good, but I need complete information." Over the next 3 hours, Sarah provided crucial details about the drug trafficking network. They operated out of a bar called the Golden Corner on a street downtown. They used several apartments in the neighborhood as drug-safe houses, and had some corrupt local police officers on their payroll, who provided them with information about ongoing investigations. She also explained that Ricky Vargas didn't work alone. He had an older partner named Fernando Reyes who handled the financial side of the business, including loans at exorbitant interest rates for desperate addicts like Daniel. The operation was sophisticated and violent, with a documented history of serious assaults against delinquent debtors. "Where is Daniel right now, exactly?" I asked, knowing this information would be vital to any strategy we implemented. "He disappeared on Friday after you refused to sign the bank documents. Ricky is holding him somewhere until he gets the money. They let him make occasional calls to pressure me, but they're losing patience quickly." That morning, after Sarah left for a hotel where she would be temporarily safe, I contacted Detective Maria Sanchez again. Despite the hour, she answered her professional cell phone immediately, demonstrating the level of seriousness she had assigned to my case. "Detective, the situation has become dramatically more complicated. I have new evidence of an organized criminal network that is directly threatening my young grandchildren." I explained as I emailed her the most incriminating recordings. Maria reviewed the material for a few minutes before responding. "Mr. Miller, this completely changes the nature of our investigation. We are no longer talking about just family crimes, but organized crime with federal implications. I need you to come to the station early tomorrow morning to coordinate with the Drug Enforcement Unit." As I hung up, I realized I had seriously underestimated the magnitude of the problem. Daniel wasn't just a troubled son. He was the weak link that had exposed our entire family to professional criminals. His addiction had opened a door that these criminals planned to keep open permanently. For the rest of the night, I developed a plan that would require perfect coordination between the authorities, immediate protection for Sarah and the children, and a strategy to permanently neutralize the criminal threat. I couldn't simply pay off Daniel's debts, because that would set a precedent that would make us perpetual victims. On Tuesday morning, before heading to the station, I made a decision that would forever change our family dynamic. I contacted my bank and requested to transfer $90,000 from my savings account to an armored account at another financial institution, accessible only through extreme security procedures, including in-person verification and multiple codes. The remaining $30,000 I kept in my original account as bait, knowing that if the criminals managed to get that information, they would find an amount insufficient for their purposes. This maneuver would buy me additional time while the authorities developed their operation against the criminal network. I also contacted Nicholas Reed to inform him of the recent developments. His reaction was immediate and forceful. "William, we are facing a situation that completely transcends normal family conflicts. We need to involve the specialized prosecutor for organized crime and coordinate with special forces." When I arrived at the station that morning, I discovered that my case had been transferred to a specialized unit led by Chief Inspector Anthony Serrano, a veteran with 20 years of experience fighting drug trafficking networks in Chicago. His office was filled with maps, photos of suspects, and diagrams showing complex criminal connections. "Mr. Miller, your information on Ricky Vargas and Fernando Reyes is extremely valuable. We have been investigating their organization for 8 months, but we haven't been able to penetrate their internal operations," he explained, pointing to photos on a corkboard. The meeting lasted 4 hours, during which we developed a coordinated strategy that would use my family's situation as an opportunity to completely dismantle the criminal network, rescue Daniel, and ensure permanent security for all the innocent members of my family. The plan developed with the anti-drug unit was risky but brilliant in its simplicity. We would use my apparent desperation as a concerned father to infiltrate the criminal organization, while specialized agents documented every aspect of their operations from strategic positions in the Southside neighborhood. Inspector Anthony Serrano explained that they needed audio-visual evidence of the transactions, identification of all members of the network, the location of their drug stashes, and documentation of their intimidation methods to build a solid federal case that would result in long sentences. "Mr. Miller, your role will be to act as the desperate father willing to pay to get his son back. You will wear hidden recording devices and hold conversations that will allow us to obtain direct confessions about their criminal activities," he detailed while showing me miniaturized surveillance equipment. That afternoon, I received a call I had been waiting for. It was Daniel, his voice broken and clearly under the influence of chemical substances. "Dad, I need you to come to the Golden Corner tonight at 10. Bring all your money from the bank, or you'll never see your grandchildren again." "Daniel, are you okay? Have they hurt you?" I asked, following the script we had rehearsed with the agents. "Just bring the money, Dad. $50,000 to pay my debt, and an additional $70,000 as a guarantee that you'll keep quiet about our operations. If you try anything smart, Sarah and the kids will pay the consequences." The call lasted exactly 3 minutes, enough time for the police technicians to trace its origin to an apartment on a street 6 blocks from the mentioned bar. The agents were already positioning themselves around the area as I finished preparing for the night operation. I was equipped with a tiny camera on my jacket button, a wireless microphone on my belt, and an emergency device that would immediately trigger police intervention if I was in imminent danger. I also carried a briefcase with fake bank papers and $30,000 in real bills to make my act believable. At 9:45 at night, I arrived at the Golden Corner, a rundown establishment with excessively loud music and a suspicious clientele. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and chemical smells that immediately reminded me of the residue I had found in my guest bathroom. Ricky Vargas met me at a table in the back, accompanied by 2 burly men who obviously served as bodyguards. He was younger than I had imagined, probably around 35, but with a cold gaze that reflected years of routine violence. "Mr. Miller, I hope you brought everything we asked for. Your son has been very problematic, and frankly, we're losing patience with this whole family situation," he said, superficially checking the contents of my briefcase. "Where is Daniel?" "I need to see him before I hand over any money," I replied, maintaining the nervous but determined tone we had practiced. Ricky signaled to one of his companions, who disappeared towards the back of the bar. 5 minutes later, he returned, literally dragging Daniel, who was in a deplorable condition. He had lost a lot of weight, had visible bruises on his face and arms, and looked like he hadn't slept for days. "Dad, forgive me for everything. Just pay what they ask and we can end this nightmare," Daniel mumbled in a barely audible voice, clearly under the influence of multiple substances. "Your son owes us exactly $50,000 for merchandise consumed over the last 8 months," Ricky explained in a completely natural, businesslike tone. "The additional $70,000 is our fee for the inconvenience caused, and a guarantee of future silence about our business activities in this area." "What kind of business activities require that level of silence?" I asked, knowing I needed to provoke specific confessions for the recordings. Fernando Reyes, the older partner who had remained silent until that moment, decided to join the conversation. "We handle the distribution of specialized pharmaceutical products, business loans with competitive interest rates, and collection services for delinquent clients like your son, all completely legal within our operational framework." "Pharmaceutical products like the cocaine my son uses daily?" I asked directly, needing clear evidence of drug trafficking. Ricky smiled arrogantly. "Your son is a willing customer of our high-quality products. Pure cocaine imported directly from Colombia, processed in our local labs, and distributed through a network of 50 sales points in Chicago. We handle approximately 200 kilos a month with profits exceeding $2 million. The confession was perfect for judicial purposes. Over the next 20 minutes, Fernando and Ricky continued to describe their operations in detail: warehouse locations, transportation methods, police corruption, and plans for expansion into other cities. Their arrogance led them to provide information that would completely destroy their organization. "Mr. Miller, once you pay the agreed amounts, your family will become part of our protection circle," Fernando explained. "This means you will have access to our specialized services, but also monthly financial contribution obligations to maintain that protection." "What kind of monthly obligations?" I asked, although I already suspected the answer. $5,000 a month as a membership fee, plus occasional participation in operations that require your house or vehicles for temporary storage of goods. It's a mutually beneficial business relationship that guarantees permanent security for you and your family. It was permanent extortion disguised as commercial protection. Once I paid the initial amounts, I would become a perpetual victim of this criminal organization, financing their operations indefinitely under the constant threat of violence against my loved ones. "I need to go to the bathroom before we finalize the transaction," I told them, using the agreed-upon signal to indicate that I had obtained enough incriminating evidence. In the bathroom, I discreetly activated the emergency device and waited. 3 minutes later, I heard sounds of struggle and shouting coming from the main area of the bar. The police operation had begun, and in a matter of minutes, the entire criminal network would be permanently dismantled. When I returned to the table, Ricky Vargas, Fernando Reyes, and their associates were being arrested by agents from the anti-drug unit. Daniel remained seated, confused but apparently relieved that the nightmare was finally over. Inspector Anthony Serrano approached my table with a satisfied smile. "Mr. Miller, the information obtained tonight will allow us to completely dismantle this organization and prosecute more than 20 criminals for federal offenses. Your cooperation has been invaluable to the security of Chicago." The days following the police operation were a whirlwind of statements, interrogations, and legal procedures that completely transformed my understanding of the American justice system. Inspector Anthony Serrano kept me informed of every development in the case as the detainees began to provide additional information about more extensive criminal networks. Daniel was immediately transferred to General Hospital for detoxification treatment and psychiatric evaluation. The doctors confirmed that he had dangerous levels of cocaine and other substances in his system, as well as clear signs of severe malnutrition and physical trauma from his days in captivity. During his first week in the hospital, he flatly refused to see me. The nurses explained that he was experiencing episodes of extreme guilt alternating with fits of anger specifically directed at me, blaming me for betraying him by cooperating with the police instead of quietly paying his ransom. Dr. Manuel Esquivel, a psychiatrist specializing in addictions, scheduled a meeting with me to explain Daniel's mental condition. "Mr. Miller, your son presents a complex picture of chemical dependency, combined with an antisocial disorder developed over the last few months. The cocaine has permanently altered certain aspects of his personality and moral judgment. Does that mean he'll never be the person I knew for 42 years? I asked, though I feared the answer. "Recovery is possible, but it requires prolonged, intensive treatment and, crucially, the patient's genuine will to change. At this moment, Daniel does not show that willingness. He still believes his actions were justified by the circumstances. Meanwhile, Sarah had returned from Wisconsin with Leo and Sophie. The children were visibly traumatized by recent events, especially after their maternal grandparents explained that their dad was sick and needed special help from doctors. Sophie, 5, began having nightmares, while Leo developed an unusual withdrawn behavior for his age. I decided to establish an educational trust for my grandchildren, but with strict conditions that would protect those resources from any future manipulation by Daniel. Nicholas Reed helped me structure a trust that would provide for educational, medical, and basic living expenses until they turned 25, managed by an independent financial institution. William, you must understand that Daniel will try to regain access to these funds once he gets out of the hospital, Nicholas warned me as we reviewed the legal documents. It is crucial that you maintain absolutely firm boundaries, no matter what emotional arguments he uses. I also proceeded to completely change my will, removing Daniel as a direct beneficiary and stipulating that he could only inherit a minimal portion if he demonstrated 5 consecutive years of documented sobriety, medical records, participation in rehabilitation programs, and stable employment. The rest of my estate was distributed between my grandchildren and charitable organizations dedicated to addiction treatment. 3 weeks after his hospitalization, I received an unexpected call. It was Daniel, his voice clearer but filled with resentment. "Dad, the doctors say I can have family visitors. I think we need to talk about what happened and how we're going to repair our relationship. Daniel, I'll be there tomorrow afternoon, but before that conversation, you need to understand that our relationship changed permanently when you decided to hit me for money." The meeting at the hospital was tense from the very beginning. Daniel had regained some weight and no longer showed the most extreme physical signs of intoxication, but his attitude remained defensive and manipulative. He immediately began with justifications for his actions and requests for financial support to start a new life. "Dad, I understand you're upset, but everything I did was out of desperation. The dealers threatened to hurt the whole family. I was just trying to protect them by paying my debts quickly. Daniel, you're 42 years old. For 8 months, you made conscious decisions to use drugs, steal my belongings, and finally physically assault me. Those weren't desperate decisions. They were deliberate choices. But addiction is a disease, Dad. The doctors confirm it. You can't blame me for being sick." His twisted logic confirmed that the changes in his personality were deeper than I had expected. Daniel had developed a narrative in which he was exclusively a victim of external circumstances, accepting no responsibility for the consequences of his decisions. Addiction may be a disease, son, but hitting your father is a criminal decision. Stealing family heirlooms is a moral choice. Those actions have permanent consequences that don't disappear with medical treatment. Over the next hour, Daniel alternated between emotional pleas, promises of radical change, veiled threats about future access to my grandchildren, and finally, direct insults when he realized my position was irrevocable. His behavior during that conversation eliminated any residual doubt about the correctness of my decisions. "Dad, if you don't help me financially, I won't be able to support my kids. Are you willing to let Leo and Sophie suffer because of your pride? The children will have everything they need through the educational fund I set up, but that support is independent of any relationship with you. You've lost the right to use your children as tools of manipulation." Daniel completely lost emotional control. He started screaming accusations about my cruelty, my lack of fatherly love, and my betrayal for cooperating with the police. The nurses had to intervene when he tried to get up aggressively from his bed to physically intimidate me. That was the last time I spoke directly with Daniel. Upon leaving the hospital, I informed the medical staff that I did not authorize future communications, and that any contact should be made exclusively through my lawyer. I also stipulated that visits from the grandchildren would require professional supervision and would only be permitted when Daniel demonstrated sustained emotional stability. 2 days later, Sarah came to my house to discuss custody and support arrangements. She had made the difficult but necessary decision to file for divorce and needed my support as a witness to the patterns of domestic violence and drug use she had documented for months. "William, I know this is all painful for you too, but I can't keep exposing my children to Daniel's instability. The child psychologists recommend minimal contact until he completes a genuine rehabilitation program. Sarah, you have my full support in any decision that protects Leo and Sophie. I also want you to know that the educational fund includes provisions for psychological therapy expenses if the children need it." The transformation of our family dynamic was final and irreversible. Daniel had destroyed the fundamental trust that underpins healthy family relationships, and the consequences of that destruction would extend for years into the lives of everyone affected. A month after cutting off direct communication with Daniel, the desperate attempts at reconciliation through third parties began. First, it was his mother-in-law, Mrs. Linda Santos, who appeared at my door one Tuesday morning with tears in her eyes and a prepared story about second chances and Christian forgiveness. William, Daniel is emotionally destroyed. He's lost 40 pounds, cries constantly, and keeps saying he just wants to win back his father's love, Carmen explained as I politely declined her invitation to sit down. The doctors say his depression is worsening because he feels you've completely abandoned him. Linda, I respect your concern for your son-in-law, but Daniel needs to face the natural consequences of his decisions. My emotional support at this moment would only delay his process of genuine recovery. Next was Father Michael, the priest of St. Patrick's Church, where Linda and I had been parishioners for 30 years. The priest, an elderly man who knew our family history intimately, tried to appeal to my religious feelings about forgiveness and redemption. William, I understand your pain, but Christ teaches us that forgiveness has no limits. Your son is suffering tremendously, and your rejection could push him towards a relapse that ends in tragedy. Father Michael, forgiving does not mean eliminating consequences. Daniel can receive my spiritual forgiveness, but that doesn't automatically restore the broken trust, nor does it justify financial support that could fund future addictions. The social pressure intensified when distant relatives began to voice opinions about my excessive harshness and lack of fatherly compassion. During a family gathering for my niece Teresa's birthday, several relatives openly confronted me about my decision to keep my distance from Daniel. Uncle William, we all make mistakes in life. Daniel is your only son, and he's paying a very high price for his problems, my niece Rose said, clearly influenced by previous conversations with other family members. Don't you think he's suffered enough? Rose, when you have adult children who break your nose for money, we'll be in a position to discuss appropriate levels of consequences for family violence. My response created an uncomfortable silence, but it also established clear boundaries about external interference in decisions that were mine alone to make. Some relatives understood my position, while others began to distance themselves socially, considering my attitude too inflexible. The situation became more complicated when Daniel was discharged from the hospital and returned home with Sarah, who had temporarily postponed the divorce proceedings, hoping for genuine signs of rehabilitation. The first few days seemed promising. Daniel regularly attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, had started individual psychological therapy, and showed stable behavior with the children. However, 2 weeks later, Sarah contacted me with concerning news. William, I found new syringes hidden in the garage. Daniel is using again, but now he's more careful about hiding the evidence. He had also started to pressure Sarah financially, in more subtle ways. He argued that he needed money for rehabilitation medications or transportation to therapies, but the amounts requested were disproportionate to those legitimate purposes. Have you considered filing for a temporary restraining order? I asked, knowing the situation could escalate again into domestic violence. I'm waiting to document more evidence of a relapse before proceeding legally. The lawyers recommended building a solid case that guarantees full custody of the children. While Sarah was managing the domestic situation, I faced a different crisis. Daniel had begun to spread false stories about my behavior, presenting me to mutual acquaintances as a cruel father who had abandoned his son during his most vulnerable moment. My lifelong friend, Joe Morgan, confronted me during our weekly coffee at the corner bar. William, Daniel came to see me last week. He was very thin, crying constantly, and explained that you threw him out of the house after he tried to ask for your help with his drug problems. Joe, did Daniel mention that he broke my nose when I refused to give him $120,000, or that he stole items from my house for months to buy cocaine? Joe's expression changed completely when he realized he had received a manipulated version of the real events. He didn't say anything about physical violence or domestic theft. This tactic of manipulating the public narrative became a systematic pattern. Daniel would contact people in our social circle, presenting himself as the victim of an insensitive father, and asking for small amounts of borrowed money that would obviously never be repaid. The situation reached a critical point when my sister Mary, who lives in New York, called me extremely upset. William, Daniel showed up at my house last night asking for money and a temporary place to stay. He was so desperate it scared me. Did you give him money? I asked, fearing the answer. I gave him $200 to make him leave. He promised to pay me back next week, but after hanging up with you, I seriously doubt that will happen. Daniel was systematically expanding his network of financial manipulation, using our family history and his status as a recovering addict to obtain resources from compassionate but uninformed relatives. I decided to take preventive measures, contacting all close members of our extended family directly. During individual calls, I objectively explained the real events of the past few months, providing documented evidence when necessary, and asking them not to provide financial support that could facilitate his continued drug use. Most of the relatives understood my position after receiving complete information. Some expressed surprise at the extent of Daniel's manipulation, while others admitted they had noticed inconsistencies in his version of events. My sister Mary was particularly receptive. William, now I understand why he seemed so nervous and evasive when I asked him specific questions about his medical treatment. His answers made no sense. However, the damage to my social reputation was already partially done. Some people preferred to believe Daniel's victim narrative, considering it emotionally easier than accepting the complex reality of addiction, family violence, and systematic manipulation. 2 months after establishing these family boundaries, the natural consequences I had anticipated began to manifest. Daniel lost his job at the advertising agency after repeatedly being absent and showing erratic behavior in front of important clients. Without a stable income and without access to my financial support, the economic pressure intensified his desperation and accelerated his personal decline. Sarah finally proceeded with the divorce and the request for sole custody when she found evidence that Daniel had tried to sell their home appliances for quick cash. The legal separation provided additional protection for her and the children, but it also eliminated the last family support network Daniel had available. Daniel's downward spiral accelerated dramatically during the fall months. Without access to my financial support, without stable employment, and facing divorce proceedings that would severely limit his access to the children, he began to make increasingly desperate decisions that confirmed the wisdom of maintaining a protective distance. Inspector Anthony Serrano contacted me in October with disturbing information. Mr. Miller, our informants on the street report that your son is trying to establish contact with minor drug dealers, possibly to start his own selling operations. Does that mean he's considering becoming a dealer to finance his addiction? Exactly. It's a common pattern when addicts exhaust all family sources of financial support. They try to generate income by selling to other users, but they inevitably consume more than they sell, creating even larger debts. This information forced me to take additional precautions to protect Sarah and the children. We coordinated with the authorities to establish discreet surveillance around her new apartment, and Sarah installed security systems that would immediately alert her if Daniel tried to approach without a court order. In mid-November, I received a call I had been dreading. It was the principal of Street Isidore Elementary, where Leo and Sophie studied. Mr. Miller, we need to inform you about a concerning incident. Your son appeared at the school this morning trying to pick up the children, claiming a family emergency that we couldn't verify with Mrs. Miller. Are the children safe? Yes. Our security protocol worked correctly. We didn't allow him to take the children and immediately contacted their mother and the authorities, but Mr. Miller's behavior was extremely erratic and aggressive when we denied him access. Sarah confirmed to me that she had been at work during the time of the incident and that she had definitely not authorized any school pickup. William, this confirms that we need to expedite the restraining order. Daniel is completely losing control of his impulses. 2 days later, Daniel was arrested again, this time for attempted robbery at a pharmacy in a downtown neighborhood. According to the police report, he had tried to obtain controlled medications using forged prescriptions, and when the pharmacist detected the irregularities, Daniel reacted violently, breaking showcases and threatening the staff. The judge assigned to the case, Judge Robert Vance, was known for his experience in drug-related crimes and domestic violence. During the bail hearing, he meticulously reviewed Daniel's recent history, including the previous arrests for the trafficking ring and the reports of erratic behavior. Mr. Miller, your pattern of behavior indicates a progressive escalation of violence and desperation. Considering the risks to public and family safety, I will deny the request for bail until a forensic psychiatric evaluation is completed. Daniel would remain in preventive custody for at least 60 days, providing crucial time for Sarah to finalize the legal protection and custody proceedings. It also gave me an opportunity to reinforce the security measures around my own house, where I had noticed signs of occasional surveillance in recent weeks. During this period, something unexpected happened that completely changed my perspective on the situation. I received a visit from Laura Mendez, a social worker specializing in complex family interventions, who had been assigned to the case by the court. Mr. Miller, I have exhaustively reviewed all the documentation related to your family over the past 8 months. I must tell you that your handling of this crisis has been exemplary from the perspective of family protection and establishing healthy boundaries. Many people have criticized me for being too hard on Daniel. On the contrary, your decisions have effectively protected the vulnerable members of your family while avoiding enabling destructive behaviors. Mental health professionals call this tough love, and it is often the only strategy that can motivate genuine change in people with severe addiction disorders. Laura explained that she had observed hundreds of similar cases, and that families who maintained firm boundaries generally achieved better long-term rehabilitation outcomes than those who provided unconditional support during active crises. Is there any real possibility that Daniel will fully recover? I asked, knowing I needed objective professional information to plan for the future. Recovery from severe addiction combined with personality disorders is possible, but it requires years of intensive treatment and, crucially, the patient's genuine internal motivation. At this moment, your son has not yet reached the point where he accepts full responsibility for his actions. 3 weeks later, Daniel sent me a letter from prison that confirmed Laura Mendez's observations. Instead of expressing genuine remorse or accepting responsibility, the letter contained elaborate justifications for his behaviors and veiled requests for financial support for competent lawyers who could quickly resolve these legal misunderstandings. The letter revealed that his fundamental mindset remained unchanged. He still considered himself a victim of external circumstances, blaming others for the consequences of his own decisions, and looking for ways to manipulate the legal system to avoid appropriate consequences. I decided not to respond to the correspondence, but kept a copy to provide to Laura Mendez as additional evidence of Daniel's current mental state. My silence would send the clear message that emotional manipulations would no longer work, and that any future communication would require concrete evidence of sustained behavioral changes. During December, while Daniel remained incarcerated, I was able to observe the positive effects of maintaining firm boundaries on the rest of my family. Leo and Sophie began to show more relaxed and natural behavior during our supervised visits. Without the constant tension of their father's unpredictable presence, they were able to process their emotions more healthily. Sarah also experienced a remarkable transformation. With the support of the educational fund I had established and without the constant financial pressure of Daniel's demands, she was able to focus on rebuilding emotional stability for herself and the children. William, for the first time in 8 months, I can sleep peacefully, knowing I won't wake up to Daniel demanding money or behaving unpredictably. She confessed during one of our monthly meetings to review the children's needs. Christmas of 2024 was the first in years that we celebrated without family tension. The children enjoyed appropriate gifts, quiet meals, and conversations that didn't revolve around crisis or drama. Daniel's absence, though sad under the circumstances, allowed us to experience a family peace we had forgotten was possible. During those Christmas celebrations, I reflected on the most difficult decision of my life, choosing family safety and dignity over misplaced compassion for someone who had repeatedly shown a willingness to hurt those who loved him most. The new year brought significant changes that fully validated the difficult decisions I had made in the preceding months. In February 2025, Daniel was sentenced to 18 months of effective prison time for the accumulated crimes: attempted bank fraud, domestic theft, physical assault, document forgery, and attempted robbery with violence at the pharmacy. During the sentencing hearing, Judge Robert Vance made statements that resonated deeply with me. Mr. Miller, the crimes committed demonstrate an escalating pattern of antisocial behavior that requires severe judicial intervention. The court recognizes that the primary victim of these crimes, your own father, has handled this situation with exemplary dignity and appropriate protection of the minors involved. Daniel showed no genuine remorse during the sentencing. Instead, he used the opportunity to make a self-pitying speech about the difficult circumstances that had led him to commit these acts, without once mentioning the consequences of his decisions on the lives of his victims. 3 months after the sentencing, I began to receive information about Daniel's adaptation to the prison environment. Through the prison system, I learned that he had been assigned to a drug rehabilitation program within the prison, but initial reports indicated significant resistance to genuinely participating in the therapeutic activities. Your son attends the mandatory sessions, but the psychologists report that he maintains a defensive attitude and consistently blames external factors for his situation, the social worker, Laura Mendez, explained during one of our follow-up meetings. While Daniel served his sentence, I focused my energies on consolidating the stability we had built for the rest of the family. The educational fund for Leo and Sophie was working perfectly, covering not only school expenses but also extracurricular activities that helped them process their trauma in a constructive way. Leo had started piano lessons and was showing a natural talent for music. Sophie was participating in a children's theater group where she could creatively express the complex emotions she had experienced during the family crisis. Both children were receiving weekly psychological therapy that helped them develop healthy emotional tools. Sarah had successfully finalized the divorce proceedings and obtained sole custody of the children, with paternal visits conditioned on professional supervision and documented evidence of sustained rehabilitation. She had also returned to university studies, using part of her newfound financial stability to complete a master's degree in nursing. William, for the first time in years, I feel like I have control over my future and my children's. She confessed one afternoon, while we reviewed Leo and Sophie's academic progress. Your decision to set firm boundaries saved us from additional years of chaos and destruction. During the summer, I received an unexpected visit that changed my perspective on the long-term ramifications of this experience. It was Dr. Manuel Esquivel, the psychiatrist who had initially treated Daniel, who requested a meeting to discuss aspects of the case that were relevant to academic research. Mr. Miller, I have followed the development of your family situation for over a year, and it represents one of the clearest examples I have observed of effective management of a complex family crisis. I would like to request your authorization to use this case as an educational model, obviously maintaining complete confidentiality of identities. In what sense could this case be educationally useful? It demonstrates how establishing firm boundaries, combined with protecting vulnerable family members, can interrupt destructive cycles of manipulation and domestic violence. Many mental health professionals recommend this strategy, but we rarely see such consistent and effective implementation. Dr. Esquivel explained that most families facing similar situations make common mistakes. They provide repeated financial support that facilitates continued addictions, allow emotional manipulation that perpetuates destructive behaviors, and sacrifice the safety of innocent members to maintain a superficial family unity. Your decision to prioritize family safety and dignity over misplaced compassion for the aggressor has resulted in a remarkable stabilization of all vulnerable members involved. This is exactly the outcome that professional literature predicts for appropriately established boundaries. This conversation provided me with the professional validation I had needed during the most difficult moments of doubt about my decisions. I had acted instinctively to protect my family, but knowing that these actions were supported by mental health best practices gave me additional peace. In September, almost 2 years after the initial incident, something I hadn't anticipated occurred. I received a call from the prison administration informing me that Daniel had formally requested to include me on his list of authorized visitors. For the first time since his incarceration, he was expressing a desire for direct communication with me. Mr. Miller, your son has completed 8 months of the drug rehabilitation program and has shown significant behavioral improvements. The psychologists believe he could benefit from limited family contact, if you are willing to consider it. What specific types of improvements have they observed? Gradual acceptance of responsibility for his actions, genuine participation in group therapy, and the development of a work reintegration plan for after his release. However, we must emphasize that progress in a controlled environment does not guarantee sustained behavior in freedom. I decided to consult with Laura Mendez and Dr. Esquivel before making a decision about re-establishing contact. Both professionals recommended extreme caution, suggesting that any communication should be highly structured and conditioned on specific demonstrable behaviors. If you decide to proceed, I recommend professionally supervised sessions, limited duration, and an exclusive focus on accountability for past actions rather than future plans, Laura Mendez advised me. It is crucial that you do not interpret this contact as a restoration of a normal relationship or renewed access to family support. After weeks of careful consideration, I decided to authorize a single supervised visit to personally assess the changes Daniel had experienced during his incarceration. This decision did not represent automatic forgiveness or restoration of trust, but an opportunity to observe if there had been a genuine development of accountability and behavioral change. The meeting was scheduled for October, almost exactly 2 years after he had hit me for money. It would be the first time we had seen each other since that tense conversation in the hospital, and I anticipated it would provide definitive clarity on the possibility of any kind of future relationship between us. The visit to the prison in October was an experience I will never forget. After 2 years of complete separation, seeing Daniel in the prison environment impacted me deeply. He had changed physically in a noticeable way. He had regained a healthy weight. His eyes had a clarity I hadn't seen since before his addiction, and his body language showed a serenity that contrasted dramatically with the frantic agitation of our last encounter. "Dad, thank you for coming," were his first words, spoken in a calm voice and with a direct gaze. "I know I have no right to ask for your time after everything I did, but I needed the opportunity to talk to you about what I've learned during these months." The conversation lasted exactly 1 hour, under the supervision of a prison social worker. During that time, Daniel did something he had never done before. He accepted full responsibility for every one of his actions, without justifications, excuses, or blaming external circumstances. "Dad, hitting you for money was the most cowardly and destructive decision of my life. There was no external threat that justified physically harming you. It was pure addict desperation combined with the arrogance of a son who believed he was entitled to your assets." He told me about the intensive rehabilitation program he had completed, including individual therapy 3 times a week, participation in daily support groups, and work with psychologists specializing in family trauma. For the first time, he seemed to genuinely understand the devastating impact his decisions had had on every member of our family. "I've written letters of apology to you, to Sarah, and even to my children, although I understand they may never read them. But writing them helped me process the true extent of the damage I caused with my selfishness." However, what impressed me most was his understanding that family reconciliation was not automatic or guaranteed, regardless of his personal progress. "Dad, I'm not asking for forgiveness because I think I deserve a second chance. I'm asking for forgiveness because I finally understand that I owe you that honesty after so many lies." During the conversation, Daniel showed me certificates for vocational courses he had completed in prison: carpentry, basic electricity, and small business administration. He had also started working in the prison library, helping other inmates with literacy programs. "Do you have specific plans for when you're released?" I asked, knowing this information would be crucial in assessing the sincerity of his rehabilitation. "I've applied for admission to a transitional housing program for ex-addicts, which includes supervised employment and mandatory ongoing therapy. I understand that I need external structure for at least 2 more years before considering any real independence." The most significant part of our conversation was his acknowledgement that the family relationships he had destroyed might never fully recover. "Dad, I accept that you may never trust me again, and that my children may grow up remembering me as the father who put them in danger. Those are consequences I deserve and will have to live with." At the end of the visit, Daniel didn't ask me for money, emotional support, or promises about the future. Instead, he thanked me for the boundaries I had set, acknowledging that my refusal to enable his destructive behavior had probably saved his life. "If you had given me that money 2 years ago, I'd be dead today from an overdose or killed over even bigger debts to more dangerous criminals. Your decision to prioritize all of us over my manipulation was the last demonstration of fatherly love I received." I left the prison with mixed emotions, but with clarity about my position. Daniel had shown genuine changes and a real understanding of his mistakes, but 2 years of progress didn't erase decades of destroyed trust or guarantee sustained future behavior. 6 months later, in April 2026, Daniel was released on strict parole. He followed the plan he had described during our visit. He entered the transitional housing program, started a part-time job at a construction company that employed ex-convicts, and maintained mandatory individual therapy twice a week. During his first year of freedom, he did not try to contact me directly. I received occasional reports on his progress through Laura Mendez, who continued to supervise his social reintegration. The reports indicated stable behavior, consistent compliance with all conditions of his parole, and voluntary participation in additional support programs. Leo and Sophie, now 17 and 14 respectively, had built stable and happy lives under Sarah's sole custody. They occasionally asked about their father, but without the emotional urgency that had characterized their first months of separation. They had learned to process the complex family situation with the help of ongoing professional therapy. "Grandpa William, will Dad ever be able to visit us again?" Sophie asked me one Sunday afternoon while we were playing in my garden. Possibly, sweetie, but only when the responsible adults are completely sure that it's safe for you and Leo. In the meantime, you have many people who love and protect you. Sarah had thrived extraordinarily during the years of separation. She completed her master's degree in nursing, earned a promotion to a supervisory position at the hospital, and developed a healthy social support network. She occasionally mentioned the future possibility of supervised visits between Daniel and the children, but without time pressure or unrealistic expectations. William, if Daniel maintains this stability for another full year, I think we could explore very limited and professionally supervised contact. But the children and their emotional safety remain my absolute priority. 3 years after that terrible day when my own son broke my nose for money, I have found a peace I didn't think was possible during the darkest moments of this crisis. My decision to set firm boundaries and maintain them consistently resulted in the effective protection of the vulnerable members of my family and, paradoxically, in the only real chance Daniel had for genuine rehabilitation. True paternal love sometimes requires decisions that seem cruel on the surface, but which in reality represent the only hope of salvation for those who have lost their way. My refusal to enable Daniel's destruction was the most difficult, but most authentic, expression of love I could offer him. Today, as I watch my grandchildren grow up in an environment of safety and stability, I know I made the right decisions. The family's dignity was preserved, justice was appropriately applied, and the natural consequences of destructive actions finally produced the only genuine motivation for change Daniel had experienced in his adult life. Sometimes, saving someone requires letting them fully face the consequences of their own decisions. That is the most painful, but most valuable, lesson this experience taught me about the complex nature of true family love. If you like this story, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the left. Thanks for watching.